Welcome to this week's episode of Everyday Thin Places. I'm Rachael Gallagher, and I'm an interfaith hospice chaplain.
And I'm Elizabeth Ferrasso, and I'm a birth doula.
And in each episode of Everyday Thin Places, we draw from our experiences supporting birthing people and dying people to explore with honesty, authenticity, and humor how we can all become more truly living people.
Rachael, how would you even sum up this conversation that we're about to share with our listeners in a single word? What would you even say?
Powerful? I mean, there are so many words to describe spending 45 minutes with Heidi Lengel, but if you're going to limit me to just one, I would say powerful.
I think I would say magical, but really we need a word that means magical in the most powerful way possible. If we had been recording video and not just audio, our listeners would have been able to observe the moment when you broke down in tears, and not just because of what Heidi was sharing, but because the weightiness of this sweet privilege of having these conversations and sharing them with the world felt so profound.
Yeah. What a thin place to be in. I can't believe that we get to have these conversations. But before we share this one with all of you, we do need to issue a content warning. Heidi is a board-certified music therapist who specializes in maternal mental health during the perinatal period, meaning that she serves people from preconception through postpartum and beyond, during which she may help people navigating fertility challenges, support them through pregnancy and infant loss, and even help mothers who experience a healthy birth and a healthy baby, but who are grappling with trauma. Not everyone is up for conversations that will include pregnancy and infant loss. And so if this could be a triggering conversation for you, we welcome you to skip this episode.
And I guess maybe don't listen while driving, because more than once during the time we recorded, all three of us were dropping tears together at the same time. And I found myself crying all over again as I edited this episode. But I don't say that to, I don't want you to mistake that this is a heavy topic or a depressing conversation in any way. I think it was actually very, very hopeful. And like I said earlier, it was a magical conversation. And I guess while we're at it, one more content warning. I am a woman. I menstruate, and in a totally relevant and pretty hilarious moment in the conversation, the words period and bleeding come up in the conversation. Maybe not a big surprise when you get three women, two of which are doulas together, but only fair to give you a heads up.
So enjoy this magical, even powerfully magical conversation that we had with Heidi Lengel. Heidi, it is such a pleasure to have an opportunity to learn about the work that you do and about who you are as a person. I'm so excited. I think a good place to start is just to ask, how did you know that you wanted to be a music therapist? I mean, we all know about music, we all know about therapy, but how did those two things fit together for you?
I actually stumbled into music therapy. I didn't know what music therapy was until well into my college years. But from a really early age, I had this kind of mysterious love for music. I remember going to see the Nutcracker with my Nana, and there was a flute solo that happened somewhere at some point, and I remember thinking, I want to live in that sound. That sound sounds like it could carry me far away to somewhere else where there's maybe another dimension or other possibilities of looking at the world. And that kind of piqued my interest. And so I played the piano and then the flute. And I actually played professionally and competitively all through high school, and so much to the extent that I burned out on music. It lost its joy. And I thought at that point I wanted to major in education. And as I was exploring my options for degree programs, I found out about music therapy. And there had been enough time for me to reflect on my relationship with music, to see what I could let go of and what would actually be helpful and useful for me to engage with music. And so that's how I found out about it, and the rest is history.
And you are a music therapist, which could go a lot of different directions. You could serve a lot of different kinds of people through that. But you specifically, and the reason we know each other, you specifically have sort of worked in the perinatal period of working with families who have gone through fertility issues, with families who are experiencing pregnancy or infant loss. And as we were talking before, somebody might ask me, just as a plain old doula, you really want to do a job where somebody's going to call you in the middle of the night and you have to leave and go and be at a birth for 3 days? And that's a lot of work, but there's the joy of this healthy baby at the end of that. And likewise, someone could say to Rachael, hey, you sure you want to go have this job? You want to go to work? But even though she's going to support dying people, they're often dying after a long, full life with loved ones around them. And you have taken the hardest part of both of our jobs, and you're working with people who are experiencing death and loss within the context of pregnancy and birth. So what would make somebody want to do something like that? How did you even have the courage and the passion to want to do something like this?
Yeah, as I was listening to you describe the combination of the two, the phrase death within life actually came to mind. I think that's how I see what I do, is living knowing that death is a part of life, and how can you live in a healthy way and in a full way, whether or not you're expecting death to come to you at any moment, in the form of the death of a loved one at the end of life, or the death of a child in utero, or shortly after death, or after birth. I actually didn't start as a music therapist focusing on perinatal mental health. I started working as a music therapist in outpatient mental health, inpatient mental health, and with people all across the lifespan. And when I started grad school for music therapy, I unexpectedly had a pregnancy loss in the very first semester of grad school. And I found in my experience of moving through pregnancy loss and grief that despite being a therapist, there was no clear roadmap. There were no instructions on how to lose a baby, how to grieve a baby. And I was a therapist. You would think, oh, okay, I can do this. But there was no one talking about it. None of my friends I didn't think any of my friends had miscarriages, because nobody told me that they had a miscarriage. And in my stumbling path through grief, I reached out to many friends and found that the statistical phenomenon of every 1 in 3 pregnancies ending in loss was actually true within my own friend group, but nobody was talking about it. And that really intrigued me, and also lit a fire underneath me to change that. And so I became really invested in creating more dialogue around pregnancy loss, ending silence around pregnancy loss, but also creating more dialogue about wellness within the context of grief, taking away the silence around grief, and exploring how people all engage very differently with grief around fertility issues or pregnancy loss or infant loss. And even parents who have a wanted pregnancy and a wanted healthy baby still grieve the loss of some of the aspects of their life that were present before they added new life to their family. And so I kind of live in this space where I see the grief in all of these experiences, and I have a real passion for helping people understand how they can be well in their body, in their relationships, in their spirit, as they encounter all of these different challenges in any part of the span of creating life.
I'm struck by what you shared about your own experience with pregnancy loss. And gosh, it's heartbreaking to hear that there were no resources for you, because if anyone had the resources, it was someone in the therapy field. And that is just, I mean, I'm so grateful that you're doing the work that you're doing and creating those resources for people, because it's just unbelievable that there was really nothing for you. And I also love what you're saying about grieving in a healthy way, because I think it's our human nature. Grief doesn't feel good, and so we want to just put it away, right, and be done with it. And I think there's so much good that can come from grief. You're a living example of that. And so I just think it's the conversations that you're able to have with people and walk them through grieving in a healthy way is groundbreaking and so, so important. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Because I just want to say, like, it's important for us to feel sad when sad things happen. And society doesn't really support that in a healthy way. And so thank you for being an advocate for that.
Absolutely. So you, in some ways, get this sort of triple whammy of thin spaces, because we know that birth and just the growing of life within a body, or all of the miracle of how humans connect and reproduce, that's a thin space. We know that death is a thin space, and you, from your experience with the Nutcracker flute solo, know that music can be a thin space. Are there any examples of like a song or a way that you can think of, maybe it was even your own loss experience, that you could say, this is how music came together with birth in an experience of loss, what would have been a birth, but was instead a loss. And those three sort of came together. And how does music contribute to the way you would experience that thin, triple thin place?
Mm-hmm. There's a song called Like I'm Gonna Lose You. Meghan Trainor sings it. And I heard it while pumping gas at a gas station. And I was pumping gas after leaving an event that raises money for what are called cuddle cots. There's a nonprofit called A Day with Chase Foundation. The parents who started that nonprofit lost their son Chase, and they started a foundation that works to support families going through infant loss. And their biggest focus is raising money for cuddle cots, which keep the body of an infant cold for up to 3 days to facilitate parents and extended family members being able to have the time they need with the baby. And I've partnered with them for a number of different things. I was at an event where we were raising money for them. And at the end of the event, everybody left and the immediate family went outside. They do this event on Chase's birthday every year. And we went outside and we let some balloons go for Chase and sang happy birthday and said happy birthday to him. And I left the event feeling as if I were going to burst with a combination of grief and love and hope and sadness, like all those things. Just my body was just full of them all at the same time. And I had to stop and get gas. And so I'm at the gas station and this song comes on and I just start sobbing. I mean, it just felt like a perfect description of the thin place that lives between life and death as it relates to a baby. And if it's okay, I wanted to share the lyrics.
Yeah. Yes.
So it starts off like this. I found myself dreaming in silver and gold, like a scene from a movie that every broken heart knows. We were walking on moonlight, and you pulled me close. Split second, and you disappeared, and then I was all alone. I woke up in tears with you by my side, a breath of relief, and I realized, no, we are not promised tomorrow. So I'm gonna love you like I'm gonna lose you, and I'm gonna hold you like I'm saying goodbye. Wherever we're standing, I won't take you for granted, 'cause we'll never know when we'll run out of time. For me, in the experiences of pregnancy and pregnancy loss that I've had, there have been a number of experiences where, while I was pregnant, I knew that I was going to lose the baby. And so I was holding a space of loving while anticipating letting go. And that is a very thin place. To be full of love, to be full of, I can't think of another word actually, to be full of love while knowing that this thing, this dream, this future person that you want to be by your side is going to move on to somewhere else. And I think there's a really beautiful way in which parents can love their children that are going to pass on or that have passed on. They can love them within the context of death. They can feel the closeness of that spirit or that soul while that baby is dying, before they die, after they die. And I think one of the reasons I'm so passionate about what I do is that people don't realize how many possibilities for connection and love and growth are available within the context of parenting a baby who is alive and is going to pass, or a baby who has passed. And so that song for me just perfectly describes this magical thin place between being alive with your baby and then being separated from your baby moving over to death, and you're still in life. I know the line, I'm going to love you like I'm going to lose you. Every time I say it out loud, I feel like that's a really weird thing to say. It's almost like I'm asking to lose you or approving of your loss. But there's some part of me that doesn't feel that way at all. I think, given my experience with recurrent miscarriage, I've come to understand that we are all losing something all the time. All of humanity is always embracing, or maybe not embracing, but living within this place of living and maybe sometimes pretending like loss doesn't exist so we can survive, right? Because you can't live all the time also knowing that there's going to be losses throughout your life. But I think there's a really rich and full way of living when you accept that loss is a part of the human experience. And so that it makes the experience of love fuller and richer.
I'm just curious to know, it sounds like you're really in touch with experiencing thin places. And it sounds like perhaps a lot of the people that you're working with who are going through these losses, they're experiencing thin places without maybe having the words for it or ever having an experience like this before. Maybe this is the first time that they've ever experienced grief in this way. From a practical standpoint, I'm just curious to know, like, what are some of the tools that you use when you're working with people in your job? Can you just give us some examples of, like, what do you do when you go to work?
Sure. Well, I think one of the biggest things that we can't discount as part of a loss, and especially an unexpected loss, is the element of trauma. And I think people, rightly so, tend to feel just as scared of loss and grief as they are of trauma. You know, you say the word trauma and people are like, oh, trauma, get me away from that as far as I could possibly go. But the reality is that when people go through an expected or unexpected pregnancy loss or infant loss, I don't think there's a way to go through that without experiencing some amount of trauma. And so one of the biggest things for people to understand about trauma is that before you can begin to process the small pieces of the story, the small details of the story, the brain and the body need to feel safe and they need to feel stable. And they need to be able to identify and understand what their resources are so that when they start to feel unsafe, when they're looking at the smaller details of the story, they have something really reliable to go back to. And so a big part of the work that I do is helping people use music to feel safe in their bodies, to feel safe in their relationships with themselves and with the people who are closest to them who maybe also experienced the trauma alongside with them, and to start to help them identify some of their own internal resources that are always going to be accessible to them when they're in the middle of Target and they turn around and there's a baby that's the exact same age as their baby would have been. Or, I mean, it could be a million examples, but Target is the worst.
It's the best and the worst.
Uh-huh. I can't tell you personally and professionally how many stories I've heard about being, swept away by grief in the middle of Target. It's in the unexpected places that grief likes to say hello. And those times and places can feel overwhelming and like they're going to just swallow you up. And I like to encourage people to develop a relationship with their grief, to develop a relationship once they feel safe with some of the elements of how their body or their mind have been impacted by trauma. I kind of liken the experience of grief to a pit where sometimes you're walking along and you think you're doing fine and you're in the middle of Target and you turn around and there's a baby there and you get knocked backwards and you land flat on your butt at the bottom of a pit. Sometimes the pit isn't very deep. You can see the surface. You feel equipped to climb out. You know that you're only going to be there for a few minutes. But other times when you fall into the pit, it's 20 feet deep and it's dark and it's lonely and you're convinced that you're never going to get back out. And so what I work with people to do is to actually start to notice what's in the pit. Is the pit dry and dusty? Is it damp and moist? Are there any resources in the pit that you can use to either heal yourself or rest from the relentless low-level grief that you might feel? And also, how are you going to get out of the pit? I was talking about the pit with someone recently, and I said, there is always a ladder in your pit. The pit has a ladder. Always, always, always. You're not allowed, using this imagery. I forbid you to use this imagery without a ladder. It's always there. It's part of the pit. And that ladder, if you look at it and you're sitting at the bottom of the pit, some of the rungs of the ladder are things that help you climb out. So maybe it's a walk with your dog. Maybe it's a warm shower. Maybe it's a good meal or a call to a friend who understands. There only need to be enough resources. Don't have to be every rung, but enough rungs that you can climb up out and sit at the top and know that you're ready to get up and walk again. Sometimes it's okay to take a nap at the bottom of the pit. Bring a cot down there. Bring a blanket. It's okay to grow some plants down there. It's okay to decorate the walls, maybe with a meditation or some kind of spiritual guidance or anything that's going to help orient you to actually knowing that you're safe, that you're not going to disappear, you're not going to get swallowed up, and you can get out when you're ready, when you feel ready.
I'm thinking about how I think of a pit as a dark place that you come out of. You're in there as long as you need to be, and you get out when it's time. And it reminds me of Valerie Kaur saying, you thought it was a tomb, and it was really a womb. And so I can picture the amazing strength and beauty of people who have those times in the pit and come out, and that is a birth to come out of that pit.
Oh my word, yes. Absolutely. It's a birth of a new version of yourself. And every time you go into the pit, you grow something new. You climb up the ladder and you come out with a new, or however many new parts of yourself to equip you to go forward. Absolutely. I love that.
And we don't wish pits for people's lives. No. But we also realize that without some pits in our lives, whether they're, I've never suffered a pregnancy or infant loss. I've had different kinds of pits. We've all had different kinds of pits, so we wouldn't wish them, but they're sort of the stuff of life. And as you describe that, it sounds so much like a thin place. To fall in is a thin place. To come out is a thin place. It's paying attention. And so thank goodness for pits. Thank goodness for the people in our lives that are those rungs that help to get us out. And I'm thinking back to our interview a few weeks ago with Dana Rummery, who's a bereavement art therapist, and how some people will say, "Oh, I don't need an art therapist. I have a coloring book." Yeah. And I don't know what the parallel is for you as a music therapist. Like, I don't need a therapist. I have a Spotify playlist. So I would just like to share, just for people to realize how incredible of a person Heidi is. I went into labor 4 weeks ahead of my due date with a plan for, all my plans got messed up, but the plan was that my 9-year-old at the time was going to be my doula. Fourth baby. I could do this without an official doula. But I went into labor was going to have a premature baby. And it is a very special person who you can call, I don't know, at like 11 o'clock and say, at the hospital in labor, think you could show up? And Heidi is that person, and Heidi is that doula. And I don't know if I knew this myself rationally. And even when I shared this with one of my close friends afterwards about how terrified I was that I wasn't going to meet a healthy, breathing baby. I had pretty faster than average labors for my first 3. My longest labor had been 10 hours. And gosh, it was pushing 14, 15, 16 hours of my body was not letting this baby out because I was so scared. I wasn't going to let her out. I was really worried she wasn't going to breathe when she came out. And so I didn't call any doula. I know a lot of doulas. I probably have 75 doulas in my contact list.
It's a lot of doulas.
And it wasn't just I really love Heidi, because I do really love Heidi. But I wanted Heidi there because I was really afraid that I wasn't going to meet a living baby. And so the work that you do is so much more than a Spotify playlist. Because I had a playlist playing, but your presence to be there in people's lives, because you've stared loss straight in the eyeballs, you have such power and strength and wisdom and beauty and more there's just not enough adjectives to describe what you have. And so for me, it's a tremendous honor to know you and to know you well enough that you would show up for me being in labor and be there to meet my baby and to speak to me and to say the words that I needed to hear to let go of the fear. And maybe this is another podcast, but to also pull out your calendar and help the doctor, the attending doctor, acknowledge that I was a full 36 weeks, not 35 and 5. Therefore, my baby did need to go to the intensive care nursery. And then my body was really ready to let this baby out. So I'm so grateful that, I know how valuable you are because you're so valuable to me. And it is so hopeful to live in a world where somebody like Heidi Lengel is using music and her experiences and her heart to usher people who are bearing trauma already and going through hard things. What a good world to live in, to get to share it with you.
I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be in the world of helping people live their fullest. You know, one thing that strikes me, I remember distinctly about your experience with your 4th baby is that, you know, you and I have this strange connection. And we actually met, we had a meeting when you were pregnant and you did not yet know it. Or were you were almost pregnant?
We might need to start that over. I was afraid I was going to bleed on your couch.
Oh, wow.
It was the first day of my last menstrual period.
Yes, that's right.
So rewind. Or maybe we'll leave it in.
Yeah.
That was the key, as you looked at your calendar and said, yes, our meeting was on this day. And I said, yes, I know I was on my period that day. Yes. And that is how we determined that by my last menstrual period, I was 36 weeks and my baby did not need to go to the intensive care nursery when she was born, unlike a baby who I was a doula for, who was born at 11:50 and would have been 36 weeks at 12 midnight, and by protocol still had to go to the intensive care nursery. So that was key, that you were there to confirm and affirm that my baby was arriving at a full 36 weeks and could stay with me. So my uterus said, all right, we'll let her out.
Yes. Wow. 36 weeks and 0 days.
Yes.
36 weeks to the day. Mm-hmm. But what strikes me about that connection is that the connection between beginnings and endings. You know, the beginning of life and maybe the ending of your baby living in your uterus and the beginning of a new beginning when she came out, right? That life is cyclical. You don't have to be trapped in one place just because you're at the ending of one place doesn't mean that there's never going to be another beginning. And maybe your heart is so broken and your body is so broken that you feel like there can't possibly ever be a new beginning. I can understand that. And at the same time, I feel like I can also say, but that's just not true, that there are always new beginnings, whether they come to us, whether we create them, whether we stumble upon them. I think that's just a gift that life gives us. And at the same time, we can make space for the endings, knowing that they're coming. Again, going back to, I'm going to love you like I'm going to lose you.
So Elizabeth is the luckiest because she had you at her disposal at the drop of a hat. And I think that is just, gosh, you're the luckiest, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm. I know it.
And I feel like our listeners are the luckiest because they get to listen to this interview with you. And I just feel like this is going to be so helpful for people. I can imagine that this is going to be something that people who need it will listen to multiple times. What other resources could you point people toward who don't have a Heidi in their life and maybe don't have access to a music therapist who specializes in all the things that you specialize in? Is there a way that people can kind of utilize music? Are there other resources that you would point people toward if they don't have Heidi Lengel?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's such a stigma around mental health to begin with. And then there's kind of a second layer of silence around maternal mental health and pregnancy loss and infant loss. And the silence is there for a lot of different reasons. But I think the first way that people can break the silence in their own lives is to see a therapist. I'm partial to music therapists, but I also love art therapists and dance movement therapists and psychotherapists who use, what most people expect when they think of therapy is a strictly verbal kind of interaction. But I think it's really important for people to make space for themselves, to just have a place where they can not bottle up all of the small parts of the stories of loss and life. A place where they can create new growth, whatever that looks like. And I think in terms of music therapy, you can actually find a music therapist on the certification board for music therapy by going to their search page and either entering the state that you live in or the zip code that you live in, or you could actually just Google music therapy in your area. I will say that there is a very small group of music therapists that specialize in perinatal mental health. However, there are ways that you can use music in your own life. One of which I would say is to use music to create a space of safety. It's important that people don't force themselves to use music from another culture or another preference of someone else. A lot of times when people make recommendations, you'll read an article that'll say, oh, use this music for birth. Oh, use this music for loss. Use this music for your fertility treatments. It's not prescriptive necessarily. The recommendations oftentimes are really centered around a white perspective of music. They lack diversity in really considering people from all over the world. And so I think it's important that people use music that is safe and familiar within their own cultural context. Perhaps music that feels safe, within their family context. music can feel safe and it can feel really unsafe too. And I don't think I've ever seen this example more in working with couples prenatally to prepare for music therapy-assisted childbirth. And I ask, is there a genre of music that feels unsafe to you? People will tell me, within a split second, what genre that is. And I'll say, are there any songs that feel unsafe to you? And they'll give me a title within a split second and say, my boyfriend when I was 17 used to beat me and this was his favorite song. So we can't tell people how to feel and what to listen to. We have to understand that people are exposed to music beginning in utero. They're hearing music and they're born into their family, wherever they live, and they're raised in whatever musical traditions are normal for them or are central to their family life. And so we can't, I'm white, and so I can't, as a white therapist, go around telling even another white person what they should be listening to or what kind of music should make them feel a certain way. That's not how the brain works. That's not how the spirit works. And so I think it's really, really important for people to find safety within their own cultural contexts rather than you being pressured to align with something that's really not, even on a neurological level, going to bring them a sense of safety and calm.
So you already mentioned, I think, a beautiful charity that even if we didn't ask you this question directly, people have heard of, A Day with Chase, and I hope somebody is going to feel inspired to want to help either financially or in some way support that organization. So whether it is A Day with Chase or something else, is there a way that we could ask our listeners to be generous in a way that would make your heart really happy?
Absolutely. There's A Day with Chase is fantastic, and they have a number of different initiatives within their organization, but there's two other organizations that make my heart really happy. One is called Sister Song, and it's a collective of women of color who fight for reproductive justice, particularly for women of color in this country. This is a little off topic, but people may or may not know that women of color face a lot more risks in their reproductive journeys than white women do. And part of my passion is creating an equal playing field for people while they are in their reproductive years, that they don't have to bear the weight of systemic racism while they are growing their families. And so that organization does fantastic work. And there is a link on their page for one particular cause that gives resources to families who are in need. And there's another website called Moms Rising, and they address a lot of initiatives related to maternal mental health and family health, and they do a lot of really great work as well. Both are really easy to find, and I think both would be easy to get involved with in different ways.
We'll link both of those on our show notes on our webpage that goes along with this episode. I'm just so happy that you're my friend, and that even though we are turning off the recorder and our listeners don't get to hear all the rest of our life together, that I'm so happy that you spent this time with us, and I'm so happy that you're my friend. And I know that now that we didn't get into this into the podcast, but now that we realize that you and Rachel are both members of the Peloton cult, as well as both being musicians, and I love that I got to introduce the two of you today.
And both embracing death and life. Yeah,
we're a good trio right here. Yeah. So I'm glad that we spent this time together and that everyone else gets to hear this time. And I thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today.
Wonderful to be here and to talk with both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Now it's our turn to hear from you. So would you do us a big favor and go into your podcast app and rate us? Even better, would you write us a glowing review? That will help other listeners to find us. And make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode.
You can also visit our website at everydaythinplaces.com, where you will find all sorts of fun and interesting information, as well as learn about how you can help to support this podcast and earn special exclusive perks. There you will also find links to follow us on social media, or else just pop directly over to Instagram or Facebook, where you will find us at Everyday Thin Places. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Rachel. Bye.